All right, ready for podcast number 2. It's not about me. Here with Coach Justin Zabawa. Coach Zabawa, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do here at Scott Catholic.
I'm alumni of Scott Catholic, graduated 2003. I teach, freshman PE now for the most part. Also coach the boys soccer team. And yeah, just been around this place for a long, long time now.
Speaking of being alumni, pretty competitive family growing up. What was it like growing up in the Zabawa household with all those great athletes that you have in your family? And
It was fun. Me and my sister are like the two closest in age, for us. And then, I have a younger brother and sister as well. So me and my sister were always kind of competitive with one another. We grew up over by St. Stephen's, right outside of the field there. So, between us and all the kids in the neighborhood, there was always, people out there, playing different sports, different things. And so, it was always very competitive. And then, I actually play a lot of soccer with my younger brother now. So it's kind of fun to be able to do that, once we got older.
Yeah, it's cool that when I came, was your sister was here, and then your brother learned a little bit more about your family, and then obviously when you came back and student taught, and then become a teacher here. Any gymnastic background like your sister and you?
No. My younger sister is probably about the only one who's got that talent. All the rest of us were, soccer or basketball players, and then somehow she ended up a gymnast and very successful at that. So, that's one thing that none of us can compete with her in.
Yeah, she's got that one on the table. Yeah. But so what? Your parents growing up, what kind of values did they instill in you and your siblings?
The big one was just, be yourself, and be honest, true, trustworthy, kind. Loyalty was a big one too. That was one thing. My parents really just always just wanted us to be, kind to other people. Obviously, and just know the boundaries of good and bad, and teaching us the right morals. And that's something that we saw with them, day in and day out. And it was, I enjoyed growing up in the Zabawa household.
Yeah. So growing up, the St. Stephen's, and then coming to Scott Catholic. Tell us a little bit about your experience as a Skyhawk.
I loved it. And the funny thing is we almost weren't going to be Skyhawks. It was, between both Millard West and Scott had both opened up, at the same time. And St. Stephen's was just growing, as we were there. Like my sister, I think, was the second graduating class from there. So like they were still putting in, classes as we were going through there. And my sister needed a higher math class. Oh. And St. Stephen's didn't offer it. And so they reached out to both Scott and Millard West, and Scott allowed her to come here to do a math class, and Millard West did not. And so I think like that was kind of the big deciding factor of my parents of sending us to Scott over Millard West at the time. And so so we ended up all coming to Scott, and so it's kind of a different little journey there. Yeah. But like I said, at that point everything was still new. All the schools are still young, and so that was kind of the journey that got us here. Mm-hmm. And then once we got here, I loved every part of it, which is obviously part of the reason I've come back to coach, to teach. It was just a great experience. Both as a student and as an athlete. I was lucky enough to be part of state championship soccer team while I was here, and and I still actually talk to quite a few of the friends that I've made when I've been here. So it's just been a long lasting impression.
So obviously upper level math brought you here, mm-hmm. because your sister was upper level math. And then what were you involved in when you were here? Activities, clubs?
So sports? I did tennis. And I actually got into tennis. There was not a single boy from our class that went out for tennis our freshman year. And Rick Benzel was the tennis coach at the time. And he also, I played club with his son, Eric, who also coaches with me here now.
Very good friends of yours. Yeah.
Yep. Sure. And so he knew a couple of us in soccer. And so he just asked us if we'd come out and play tennis. So we were like, sure, we'll give it a shot. And we didn't have tennis courts here at the time, so we practiced out at Champions. So I ended up playing tennis for 3 years. Um, I played basketball my freshman year, wrestled my sophomore year, swam my senior year. So I hit all the winter sports, and then played soccer for 4 years. I was also part of student council for I think a year, maybe two. Um, that might have been it in terms of
That was a lot of
business stuff. Yeah.
activities, and that's one thing that we always pride ourselves here at Scott Catholic is getting people involved. And now that you're an assistant activities director, I see that with you in your involvement with getting other kids involved and being at other kids' activities. What would you say to kids that are thinking about maybe testing the waters in those different sports and activities?
Oh, I would say try it, especially when you're younger. When you're a freshman, sophomore, just because you never know what things you're gonna like.
Yeah.
Like I said, I would have never thought about playing tennis if somebody didn't come up to me and was like, "Hey, let's try this." I was like, "Okay." Same thing with wrestling. I would have never wrestled, but they were like, I was not a very big kid, and so they needed a couple kids at the real lightweights, and they were
Yeah.
like, give it a try, and I was like, all right, I'll give it a try, and
So,
so
so you kind of mentioned Rick and some others, but who are some of those influential people for you, teachers, coaches coming through?
yeah, so yeah, Rick, and I've known Rick Bedzo for a long, long time. And I mean, he's just a great guy. He's always still very concerned about our program now. And which I love. He's still a big part of it. But even just the I'm lucky to have an administration that is our big soccer people too. So even those are people I still lean on, look up to. Mr. Myers, Mr. Bailey. We always sit there and we'll talk soccer.
Yeah.
Quite a bit. So those are people that still influence me. Today. I had a couple coaches growing up, like Coach Bengira, while I was here.
You gonna tell any stories? Maybe stories?
Oh, well, we could be here for hours if I told stories about Coach Bengira. But I mean, he's somebody like when he would come from prep, and so we would always try to get practice and training and stuff started before he got there. Because if we didn't, we'd have to sit there for about 45 minutes of him, talking and explaining stuff, which don't get me wrong, we all loved, but there's definitely times where we were like, all right, we got to get practices, we can get out of here. But no, he was somebody who, we just, we all loved. We all still talk about, him and telling
always.
stories about him. He just was a lot different than some of the other coaches that we had.
Yeah.
So he was always somebody that, like I said, still to this day, like, I talk to about and reminisce about. So
are those people some of the people that kind of got you into becoming a teacher? How did you kind of decide to become a teacher?
So I always, in the back of my mind, I knew I always wanted to be a teacher. And I'll sit here and my journey of being a teacher and getting here probably doesn't happen if it didn't go the way that it did. So I wanted to be a teacher. Went to UNL, and they ended up dropping the PE program and stuff. And my dad was always like, well, teachers don't make that much money anyway, you should probably go into something else. And I was like, all right, whatever. And so I went through college and everything, and ended up leaving UNL with a degree in social sciences. But I did continue to take a lot of my teaching courses while I was there.
Yeah.
And graduated from there. Was working landscaping at the time, so I kept doing that. And then I got into coaching first, and that's when I went back and I was like, I'm going to go back to school and get my teaching endorsement and my PE endorsement. So ended up going to UNO because they offered the PE endorsement there. So ended up going through and getting that done. And then because of that, I think that kind of helped get me to my journey here. Because if I would have, got out of school, graduated, and became a teacher right away, I might not be here, could have had a different job.
Yeah.
So I think that's just one of those moments where you look at it and, it's like it all happened for a reason. And I was able to
Yep.
get here. And my wife will tell you that, I'm living my best life, because I love my job, love working here, love coaching here. So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
tell us about the Nebraska City time driving back and forth. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember being in the weight room and you coming into student teaching. I was like, holy cow, that's quite the drive every day.
Yeah. So, me and my wife was teaching in Nebraska City when we met. And so when we first got married, I lived down there probably for about 2 years. We actually lived down there, but a year of it, which was commuting here. And so, yeah, getting up every day at 5:30. Coming here, teaching, and then coaching.
Yep.
And I was coaching club at the time too. So there sometimes I wouldn't get home until 10 o'clock at night, or sometimes I'd have to just stay here at my parents if it was that late of a night,
Yeah.
and turn
Turnarounds.
around and get back up. But yeah, so I mean that was. I'm glad I was younger when I was doing that, because those were some long days.
Well, that's one thing that I always look back on, a little bit on my career, but on that transition when I transitioned and you came in, and how it all kind of the puzzle pieces started to fit in place,
Yep.
and it all worked out. But the dedication you had to drive back and not know if you had a job or not here, but
Yep.
this kind of was a place you wanted to be. How did you know this was the place you wanted to be, and make a family with Aaron here in Omaha?
I think that stems from my experience here, the experience that my siblings had, and that my how involved my family still was.
Mhm.
So I think when my brother graduated, I think '09, and I started coaching in 2010, so I just missed
Yeah.
coaching him by a year. But I mean, just like that sense of community, just knowing that you always just feel at home here, you always feel welcome here. Whether you're a alum who's been gone for 10, 15, 20 years, or whether you just graduated. I think that this place just does such a great job of making you feel at home, making you feel welcome, and just making you feel involved. When you get here.
Yeah.
I think those are just things that keep bringing you back. And that's what my wife says. The thing she loves about this place is she's from small town, and that it just has that small town vibe of just the connectedness, and everyone wanted to be involved and helping
Yep.
out. And so that's why she's happy that our kids are going here too.
Well, speaking of having a tight knit community, the soccer community is pretty tight here, and has been very successful. You were on the first state championship team. Now the soccer team has won multiple championships. But what do you think success is for the soccer team? I mean, what do you define success when you look at the soccer program?
To me, I think that has changed a lot. Like now, I look at the success as within the program of all the guys that want to come back, and all the guys that still want to be involved. I look at that I've made an impact on these kids. When I get a call and like, hey, coach,
Yep.
we want to go out to lunch. Do you want to go do this or that? And get invited to wedding. Like a lot of players are starting to get married now that I've coached. And I've been to a couple of their weddings. So that just to me, like that just means that I've helped somewhere along the line to them.
Yeah.
Of more than just on the soccer field. But now in terms of obviously the team in general, I think obviously you could say success would be the winning the state championships. But part of that I think is just like the learning to grow in the process. And that was something we saw this year, especially was we've had so much success, and we've graduated a lot of guys. And this was a group coming in that didn't have a lot of varsity experience, and so there was a process there that we had to go through of getting guys
Hmm.
acclimated to the varsity high school game. Because it's different than club, it's different than JV. And so there was a lot of new pieces we had to throw in. So just going through that process, and then seeing us grow throughout the year, and every time we thought we had made a step forward, something would happen. We might have fallen backwards, but those guys never gave up. They never quit, and ended up making the state tournament.
Yeah.
In a year where most people probably didn't think we would. So to me, like that was, success of them going through that process of growing, of becoming a better team, better people. And so I think that was a
Yeah.
good year for success, for that group.
Well, you mentioned relationships and having kids back and things like that. How do you build relationships inside the program?
A lot of that is, just getting to know guys, outside of soccer, and
Hmm.
I think, being present in the building, is so important, because, I see them every day. We can start, doing some weightlifting stuff and some team stuff early, where, when you're not in the building, it's a lot harder to do those things. So being in the building, being present, just talking to those guys about, not just about soccer, but about other things that are going on in their life too. It helps deepen those relationships, so it builds that trust, which I think helps build upon success
Yeah.
in the program as we go on.
Yeah. And one thing that I'll mention, because in the way his desk is in the weight room, so I
Yeah.
get here in the morning and I'll look at the desk and he's got his stuff ready for the next day. But um, the students really love you beyond the soccer kids. One thing that I've always noticed is when we get the little grant, thank you grams from National Honor Society, Student Co. It's more non-soccer people that are writing you those things because of the relationships you build. So speaking of people outside of the soccer community, what do you do during the normal school day to help build relationships and build that community here at Scott Catholic that you think
So this
is
is one
awesome?
of the reasons I really like teaching the freshmen, is because I get them all,
Yep.
and so I get to learn who they are at a young age, watch them, grow throughout. So I get I get to build that relationship early with them, and then being able to go see, what they like, their interests, and then going to their sporting events, going to their activities. I think that just helps provide a little more. Of wow, this, they do care about us here.
Yeah.
We're not just, another student. Like, they're coming to watch us in our activities and things like that outside of the school day. So I think those are things that help, as well. But yeah, like just getting to know them at such a young age, and watching them grow and develop and encouraging them. I think those are things that
Yeah.
really just help me,
Yeah.
with building those
I
relationships.
I just think it's cool because you get the little notes, and then there's all on the whiteboard. There's usually a few. They're usually probably girls that write on the board
Yeah.
just about Coach Z's my favorite, or guys that razz you a little bit
Yeah.
about a score or something. So it's
Oh yeah.
always fun. But you talk about freshmen. Well, your son was a freshman last year. So what was that like, having your son here at Scott Catholic and then being part of the soccer program? But what was it like having? Because I'm going to experience that this year.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
It was, one of those just full circle moments. Partly because it was hard to believe that, it was that long ago that I graduated from here, because it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. But part of that is because I'm still here all the
Yeah.
time, so never really left. But yeah, just that full circle moment of having your own kid here. I'm sure there were days where he liked it, where he didn't like it. He probably realized that I probably learned stuff pretty quick about what goes on here.
Yeah.
But no, I think he really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it too, and it's just a blessing to be able to to bring your kids here, my son here. I'll have one here in what, 2 years now as well.
Yeah.
So just to be able to share the joys that I had, the kind of watching it and seeing how much has changed, place has changed, but also
Mhm.
how much is still the same, from when I was here. And the funny thing is he did have one teacher that I had. Uh, when I went here, he had her last year too. So I'm sure that was
So
a
parent-teacher
treat.
conferences were fun because you're
Yeah,
like, oh, hey.
yeah. Just sitting in the other seat at that
Yeah,
time.
exactly. So the podcast is It's Not About Me. When you're looking at your teaching and being an athletic director and coaching, what does that phrase mean and resonate with you?
I Teaching and coaching. I think that saying, goes such a long way, because that's, you're here for the students. You're here for your players, and how you can get them to grow, how you can shape them for their futures. So yeah, the things that we do, it's has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with them, and how we can help mold them and instill those values and morals that we're trying to teach and
Hmm.
get them into them at a different level. Because as a parent, you can do stuff for so long to your parent, your kids, you can tell them the same thing over and over and over, but then as soon as they hear it from someone else, it kind of clicks.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of part of teaching. Like apart from their parents, we're the people they probably see the most. And so we can be really influential on them, and so I think it's important, that we do that in the right way.
You talked about your parents instilling kindness in you and teaching be kind, and I see you doing that every single day. And your kids, that's one reason your kids really love you. The kids you teach and coach. What are some of the values that you have that you're passing on? Those cornerstone things that you hope to pass on through
Yeah,
teaching and coaching.
yeah. I mean, respect has to be up there as one. You got to respect everybody, no matter who they are, and obviously this being a World Cup year, and I know we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but I mean, you've just seen, all these different cultures and people who have come together, um, you know, throughout this, and
Yeah.
something that probably doesn't happen, a lot unless there's a big event like this going on, and you only hear certain things, what the media portrays and things like that, but then you get all these people together, and it's just been a great atmosphere and a great, all these different cities have seen
Yeah.
the greatness of all the communities. So I think you start to build a little bit of respect, towards each community and each culture, just by being around those people. So I think that's one of the big things that I tell, we're always going to respect, our opponents. We're going to respect, one another. And it doesn't matter who they are, where they come from. You're going to show them the respect that they deserve. Um, the other one is, we're going to compete.
Yep.
We're out there to compete, but you're going to do it the right way. And again, you kind of see, some of the different ways in which programs compete, and how they handle themselves. And I think it's important that win or lose, you compete and you handle yourself the right way. And those are probably two of the big one: respect and compete, and then obviously just at the end of the day, just be a good person, be
Yeah.
kind. I know it's a lot easier said than done at times, but I think you always just got to sit back and not go off of emotion. Again, like going back to our World Cup thing, you saw this whole red card thing with Florian
Yeah.
Balogun, and the way he handled himself, and talked to it, and he took a step back and said, I could have been really angry, but he's like, I'm out here to influence young kids, younger generations, and I think in that situation, it's important to handle myself in a way that showed respect, to the referee, respect to the other players, and was just able to influence, kids and show them the right way to handle a situation like that, as opposed to, I mean, how easy would it have been for him to just, blow up and
Yeah.
explode and everyone to start yelling and getting in people's faces. And, so I think those are, things that, he learned, he was somehow instilled in him. And, so those are types of things that, we kind of need to do as well.
That's awesome. Well, before getting more into your program, let's stay on the World Cup thing
All right.
because you were able to go to Atlanta and
Yep.
then you were able to go to Seattle.
Hmm.
So tell us about the World Cup, what it means to you, and what it meant to go to those games.
Yeah. So when it was announced that the U.S. was going to host, you know, I think it was 8 years ago. I told my wife, I was like, our boys are going to be at a great age to go to this. I would love to do that. And so we always had that in the back of our mind that we were going to do this. Well, when it all came to fruition, it was, uh, a little more pricey, than we initially thought it would be. So that dream looked like it was kind of going to die out. And then my cousin ended up coming over from England, and he actually just left
Yeah,
yesterday.
you guys went down to Dallas too. You
Yeah,
went to three
so
locations.
yeah, so me and him, that's what started it all. We drove down to Dallas, didn't have tickets, and went and hung out down there. And that was an incredible experience. The way Texas has it all, Dallas Stadium has it all set up. So we ended up not going to that game, but we still were there with
How was the crowd?
Oh, the crowd was incredible. I mean, going there and walking into, there was a place called Texas Live, and it was a big old outdoor or indoor outdoor venue, and I bet there was 7,000 people there and just chanting and having a good time, and
Yeah.
that was fun. So even though we didn't get to go to the game, like we still enjoyed that experience. And then kind of out of nowhere, um, I happened to looked at tickets for the England Congo game in Atlanta, and this was I think on Monday, and the game I think was on Wednesday. And I told my wife, I was like, "These are the price range we talked about. We could all forego." And she was like, "Do it." And so I booked our
Yep.
tickets. I called my cousin. I was like, "Hey, like we're doing this. Do you want to go?" He was like, "Yeah." He's like, "I'll go." I was like, "Okay." And then called my brother, and my brother was like, "Yeah, let me see if I can get off work." And so he got off work, and so the six of us got in the car,
That's awesome.
drove to Columbia, Missouri, stayed the night, got up, drove the rest of the way to Atlanta, and went to that game, and it was incredible. Being able to be there with my kids,
Yeah.
and experience that it was awesome. Something I hope that they'll remember, forever.
The
And then we
videos and pictures you sent
Oh
were
yeah, they
amazing.
were. It was like it's just such a different environment from an American football game or basketball game. It just because you just see the different cultures like we talked about earlier, the different cultures coming out, and the
Yeah.
singing and the chanting, and you know uh, it was just a great environment to be a part of. And then to see a late winner
Yeah.
from England, when you throughout the game you're just wondering if they were going to do it. And with my mom being from England, I had a little bit of a little more investment into that,
Yeah.
which is why England was one of the ones that I wanted to go see. So that was a great experience. And then after that game, we ended up driving all the way back to Nashville and watching the U.S. game that night. So it was a lot of driving for that trip. And then ended up getting to go see the U.S. play Belgium in Seattle. Again, that was just out of the blue, trip. My wife called me up and was like, "Hey, I'm gonna get us plane tickets. How much would you pay for a ticket to the game?" And I said, "Priceless," because it was just something I've wanted to experience. And yeah, so we flew out on Sunday night, went to the game Monday, and flew home yesterday. And again, just unfortunately that game didn't go as we would have liked, but just an incredible experience.
Yeah. So from the pro game to the high school game, what similarities and differences do you see, and what do you try to coach to maybe make it similar to the program?
Yeah, so I mean, the big similar. I mean, you're going to see a lot of like the same tactics, things like that we do in the high school game. The only difference is, I mean, one, speed of play obviously is.
A
I
little
mean,
faster.
yeah, and I saw that especially at the England Congo game in the second half. You could tell that England just picked up the pace of play, and you could just see like how much faster they were moving the ball, and that was something that was way different from the first half, because the first half looked like they were just
Yeah,
kind of at
lackadaisical.
a pregame training session, of just knocking the ball around at their
Yeah.
leisure pace, and then all of a sudden there's like guys like if we don't do something, we're out of the World Cup, and then all of a sudden it just clicked, and like just the pace of the ball is moving at the touches that they have. I mean, obviously, especially in tight spaces, and it's just incredible to watch. But I mean, you look at the same type of tactics, and just how things form, runs that guys make. Those are all things that you're trying to do, and now you're starting to wonder. Coming out of a tournament like this, you always see a certain team play a certain way, and then you start to see, do club teams start to adapt to that?
Yeah.
Because it's always evolving, it's always changing,
Yep.
and to how can you get the upper hand? And and that's one of the things with coaching high school is I don't get to pick all my players to play a certain system.
Correct.
I have the kids that come here. I'm going to coach them, and I'm going to do the best I can, but I have to adapt to what we have. It's not like a club where I get to pick. I need these guys because we want to play this system. The guys that we have. So we've played a 3-5-2 because those are the players we've had,
Absolutely, yeah.
and we were able to be successful. Well, when we weren't able to play that way, we had to adapt and, switch our formation and things like that. And so, so watching the professional level, how certain teams run those types of formations and the tactics they use, like those are things that I kind of pay attention
Yeah.
to see like if those are things we're able to instill into our program.
So when you look at that, and soccer has a big club component to it, just similar to volleyball.
Hmm.
But how do you do such a good job of bringing all those club players together to be a Skyhawk team? How do you do that? How do you get that? Because training is probably different from every club, and then
Yep.
you have to bring terminology and everything together. So what do you do to do that?
Yeah, I think part of that again stems from what we do in the off season, and getting guys playing together, feeling comfortable, building that team chemistry, before the season actually starts, because soccer, spring sports are such a short
Oh yeah,
window, and then we also have to deal with the weather, so you just never know exactly what your trainings and stuff are going to look like. So I always say, and when I talk to parents, high school and club are so different because I, like I said, I have 2 months to make this group into a team. I don't have 9 months, to work on all those, a lot of those, basic, skills, the foundations, things like that,
yeah,
because we just don't have that time. So I do think it's important of the things that we do in the off season of starting to build all that team chemistry, and then when we get out there, I like to think of myself as more of like a player coach, and I try to keep the guys involved and in the loop, and I talk to the captains especially, quite often about what they are out there, what they see, what they think that we need to improve on, because it's easy for me to stand on the sideline and say we need to do this, this, and this, but when you talk to
yeah.
them, they're actually out there. They're the ones that are like, yeah, like that's happening, but that's happening because of this reason. They're out there playing, and so I think it's important, to make sure they're involved in how the team is being shaped and the things that we're working on. Just because, again, they're the ones out there,
Correct. Yeah.
and so to me that's a very important part of building that team, building that culture, that relationship, is making them be a part of some of those decision makings. And
Yeah.
when we watch film, I tell them all the time, like, this isn't me just telling you guys you have to do this, this, this. Like, we're gonna watch some things, and I'm gonna ask you, like, what do you guys see? What do you guys, what should we do here? What are some options? Because everyone sees the game different.
Hmm.
So I think it's important that we don't just instill like you have to do this in this situation, because there could be more options, and
Yeah.
so it's important to see what other people see, and again, I think that's just involved in the making everyone feel part,
Yeah.
of the program no matter
Yeah.
what.
Well, those are two things that good leaders do. They listen and they give and take feedback. And so, how do you continue to grow as a leader? What things are you doing to help with that?
I mean, listening to podcasts, reading books. I mean, you send us stuff all the time, to read, and so I think that's important. But I also think it's like, I mean, you know, leadership has changed so much from even when I started coaching to now. Of it used to just be I was the coach, you're the player. You're gonna do what I tell you to do, and that's it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how it was when we were growing up.
Yep.
Like, you just, okay, coach, yep.
Yep.
Or like same with teachers. It was what they said. There was not a lot of conversation back and forth. It was more of a, they were authority. You were
Yep.
So I think just evolving with the times, I think is important, in leadership, and finding out how the kids nowadays like to be led. I mean, they don't, kids don't necessarily respond to that. This is what we're doing. So I think it's important that you build relationships, that you talk to them, you listen, and I think those are just big things that I think are important moving forward, and
Yeah.
just helping me develop as a leader is building those relationships with the kids, and finding out what makes them tick, and
Correct.
those things that motivate them, and then finding ways to implement that into the things you do.
So you have a couple, we'll say, traditions as a soccer program. Tell us a little bit about Lucky Charms
Hmm.
and about the goose on the sideline.
Yeah. So Lucky Charms started in 2003. If I remember right, we had a kid on our team named Mark Finicaro, and he would bring a box of Lucky Charms to a game. And before the game, we would all just stick our hand in the box, grab out a handful, and eat them. And then he would sprinkle some on the field for good luck. So that's how it all started. And we ended up, winning the state
Yeah.
championship. We were undefeated that year. And I was a senior at that time. So, that tradition kept going. And eventually it became out to where, they lay their jerseys out and put them on their
Sprinkle on
jerseys.
there.
Which is probably better since, we play mostly on turf now.
Yeah.
Back then we didn't really play on turf ever. So it's a little easier just to throw some on the grass and the birds would get them. But,
Yeah.
now you don't want to leave them on the turf. So, but yeah, so that tradition is still going, and it's funny to see that it's still going
It's awesome.
20 some odd years later. And then the goose came from, that was the 2009 team, and my brother was on that team, and he was involved. They were out, I think, doing their annual TPing with the girls that they used to do, and they took it off somebody's front porch and dressed it up and started bringing it to games. And whoever's house they took it from, just told them, what, keep it, because at that time, I think they were, I think they might have been like 7-8 or something. Like they didn't have a great record, and then as soon as they got the goose,
Yeah.
they kind of went on this win streak, and then they ended up going to state at 9-8 and ended up winning the state tournament.
I know that was a crazy year.
That might have been 2008 then. I don't know. It was one of them, but yeah, it was. It was. Yeah, and so the goose. And now it's seen better days.
It's getting a little beat up.
It is getting beat up, but the guys still bring it, and we'll see how much longer it'll last.
Those are cool things that you can teach the kids below, and they can pass those traditions on and things like that. So it's cool that you can have those traditions part of the soccer program and keep them going. So thank you for doing that and allowing that to happen. When you look at traditions and things like that, what advice would you give yourself if you could go back in time when you first started coaching?
Probably be, just to trust the process of, again, like I talked earlier about how, like things worked out the way they worked out for me, and I ended up, coming here, teaching here. So I think if I were to go back, and tell myself, I would just be, trust that, things are going to happen the way they're supposed to happen. And to be patient. I know when I was a younger coach, I was a lot more fiery on the sideline than I am now. But the older I've gotten, the more I've learned that the way I act and behave obviously is going to influence the way the team acts and behaves on the out there. So I think it's important that if I were to go back and tell myself that, it'd be like just calm down a little bit, relax, and
yeah, but then we wouldn't have the aviators
that's
and
true.
all that,
That's
that
true.
serious look, and Coach Saunders wouldn't be able to razz you about it.
Right,
So,
right.
those are all good things. So one of my mentors and your mentor as well, Mr. McMahon, AD here, had a phrase: "How do you want to be remembered?" How would you like to be remembered as a coach and teacher?
I just want to be, remembered as someone who the kids enjoyed, they looked up to, enjoyed having as a teacher, someone who, hopefully influenced, one or two kids before I leave here.
Yeah,
But yeah, like I said, just somebody who was able to be a mentor. Someone that the kids feel comfortable even 20 years from now, if I start to get some of my students kids, if I start teaching them, they're like, oh, that was one of my favorite teachers, or somebody that like they're still proud that like, oh, I'm so happy you have him as a teacher. We've heard such great things, but I guess I can only hope, I guess.
Yeah, we got a lot of time before that happens.
Yeah,
So
that we do.
one of the parts of starting this podcast was about the Skyhawk Power Project.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the Zinc Activity Center What is that going to mean to the soccer program, and what are you excited about?
Yeah, I'm most excited. That we're never gonna have to worry about weather.
Yeah, yeah,
In terms of having to cancel trainings, things like that. Being able to, do some things in the morning. Not having to, to work around like gym time and stuff like that.
so,
Because it's not always easy to, find time to get in there and run, especially in the winter. Now, luckily, we've had a couple of these winters where we've been able to get
no, been nice.
outside, and so it hasn't been as big of a deal. But yeah, just having that opportunity to, to do some small sided stuff and, get those guys more so now we can be active, out there all year,
Yeah,
and so it'll just be great to have that space. And then obviously the weight room is going to be a huge, step up. I mean, you come in here in the summer and, you got 100 people in there and,
it's
you
packed.
can't really move. Yeah. And now we're going to have this big giant space. And I think that's just going to be, huge for, our current athletes. And obviously, adding that, might, bring in some more kids that maybe were on the fence, and then they see this thing come in and be like, I want to be a part of that.
No.
So um,
And
yeah, I
some
think it'll
cool
be good.
PE games can
Oh,
probably
it is.
happen
Oh
in
yeah.
there. There's Wiffle Ball World Series is going to
Oh,
be
Wiffle World
amazing.
Series would be amazing. Me and Coach Saunders, if you remember the American Gladiators when they had the tennis ball machine where they would shoot it at, like we had talked about trying to get one of those installed. And
There you go.
yeah, I mean standing
Hey,
up there at the top row and
sky's the limit. It'll be fun.
oh yeah.
Getting it all together. All right, so a couple last questions here. Uh, who are some of the people that you would like to thank for helping you get to this point with your teaching and coaching career?
My parents would have to be top of the list there, just because of the sacrifices that they had to make, to send us to private school, because it is a sacrifice that families have to make, and so for them to make that sacrifice to send me here, because if I ended up not coming here, we might not be having this
Yeah,
conversation right now, so I think they have to be, at the top of that list. They've just been, so influential, on all me and all my siblings, and I know you've met them before,
yep.
and so they've been a big part of this community. And then obviously to all of you guys who took a chance on me. I student taught under you
No.
during a kind of like you said a transitional period here at Scout where there's a lot of things going on.
Yep.
And to Coach Myers, he brought me onto his staff, and Mr. McMahon hired me as the head coach when Coach Myers moved into his role as principal. So, without all that, like I don't think any of this is possible.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there's a lot of things that happened there really quickly, and it all ended up working out great because you're here. And one of those people that I think is really cool is your wife, Erin. And she does a lot behind the scenes. And we all couldn't do this without our wives. So tell us a little bit about Erin and her support, and maybe some of the things that people might not know that she's done.
Yeah. So I mean, without her support, I can't do a lot of those things because I mean, as a former coach, that it takes up a lot of time outside of just training, of just of watching film and
Yep.
going to games and being as the head coach, you're not just doing varsity only, you're doing all the levels.
Yeah.
And I think that was something that she kind of had to adjust to a little bit, but
Because she
now
wasn't a soccer person.
she was not a soccer person. No, not until she met me, and now she loves it. Both my kids are highly involved in soccer, and so that's what something that she has to do throughout the spring is constantly get them to places. So having one of my boys here this year in the soccer program obviously helped that a lot of in terms of her not having to do quite as much of all the tilling around. But I wouldn't be able to do that without her support. And like I said, there was 1 year, we were making our state shirts, and the place we bought them from forgot to put their numbers on the back of their jerseys, and so she loves doing all the crafts and the crickets, and so she put all the numbers on the back of every player's jersey, or their warm-up shirt for that state tournament. Which is something I don't know if the kids knew or not.
They probably didn't. She's so
yeah,
good at it.
Yeah.
They probably didn't even notice.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure I told them, but just little things like that. I know one year she made them all cookies, for state. Then there are Skyhawk heads that had their number and everything on them and everything. So, she's really bought into the Scout Catholic community, and loves it. Loves it. Like I said, her being a small town,
Yeah.
just gives her that small town feel that she loves to be a part of. And so I couldn't thank her enough for everything she's done.
Yeah, she's a great baker. Never
Yeah,
pass up a scotcheroo from Aaron Zabawa.
that's
So that's
true.
for sure.
That's true.
So last thing, if you could leave behind a message to our listeners, those that are listening, about youth and about making sure it's not about you, what's one of those messages that you'd leave to our listeners?
Yeah. So we're as adults, as educators, as coaches, our job is to influence the next generation, and to do that in a positive way. And to know that not everything has to be about you. Every decision you make, everything you do, it's going to impact people in different ways. And at some point, you just got to kind of take a step back and say, how is this decision going to impact more than just me or just even my circle? What impact is it going to have on the community? And so I think it's just important to kind of take a step back and look at the real purpose of why we're here, why we're doing the things we're doing. And it's not about us. It's about the kids, about the youth, and helping shape them to be good people when they're older.
Yeah, it's about being kind, being respectful,
Yep.
and making sure you leave something better than it was.
Yep.
And you definitely have left this place better than when you started, and it made a huge difference and impact in a lot of kids' lives. So thank you for
Yep.
doing that, and thanks for being a part of this podcast.
Yeah.
Being number 2 on
Absolutely.
here. So enjoy the World Cup, the rest
Yeah.
of it, watching the games.
Yeah.
Maybe there'll be another one in the store for you, but you never know.
I think I might be tapped out now that the USA's out.
There you go. But well, thanks again
Yeah.
for joining, and thanks for all you do.
Thank you.
Thanks, Coach.
Appreciate it.